He gave a stranger his coat in a snowstorm, and lost the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. What he didn't know was that this small act of kindness would open a door he never expected to something bigger than second chances, to something that might just change everything. If you believe that ordinary moments can hold extraordinary meaning, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that warm your heart, restore your hope, and remind us all why kindness still matters. Now, take a deep breath and let's begin. Single dad lost his job for helping a woman. Then she gave him something he never expected. The snow came down like it had a grudge against the earth. Jake Callahan gripped the steering wheel of his battered old Chevy, the heat barely keeping the windshield from fogging over. It was past midnight in Marlow, a town too small to matter and too cold to forgive. The roads were deserted, streetlights half buried under heavy flakes casting long, lonely shadows across the empty sidewalks. He just wanted to get home to his daughter Sophie. She'd be asleep by now, curled under the threadbare quilt Jake's late wife had sewn during her chemo treatments before everything unraveled. Jake had worked a double shift fixing a busted HVAC system in the hotel's west wing. No thanks, no bonus, just tired hands, sore knees, and the lingering scent of bleach on his uniform. He turned onto 6th and eased off the gas. Something flickered at the edge of the road. Movement. Jake squinted. A figure. A woman. She stood barefoot on the sidewalk, shivering in a navy blue blazer over what looked like a silk blouse utterly unsuited for this kind of weather. Her hair was soaked, clinging to her face, and her arms were wrapped tightly around herself like she was holding something in. Jake slowed to a stop and rolled the window down, the wind slapping him in the face. "Ma'am, you okay?" She didn't answer, just looked at him with wide, frightened eyes like a deer caught in a beam of light. For a moment she seemed like she might run. Then her lips parted and her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Please, don't call anyone. I just need somewhere warm for a bit. Just a little while." Jake hesitated. Everything about this screamed complication. But then he looked closer at the trembling in her fingers, the raw pink of her bare feet, the bruise just under her hairline she'd tried to hide. She was maybe mid-30s, clearly from money. Those were designer shoes in her hand, soaked to ruin. This wasn't drugs or drama. This was fear. Real, raw fear. He leaned over and opened the passenger door. "Get in." She climbed in, moving stiffly, her fingers icy as she pulled the door shut. Jake cranked the heat up and glanced at her. "You hurt?" She shook her head. Chased a pause. Not anymore. Jake didn't ask anything else. He'd seen enough as a former mechanic on military bases overseas. Some people need help. Some people need silence more than questions. He drove toward his apartment in the industrial edge of town. The building was old but warm. He parked and they walked quickly inside. His daughter's room was dark. He tiptoed past it and opened the guest room, the one they rarely used except when his brother visited once a year. "You can take this room," he said. "There's a space heater. Towels in the bathroom across the hall." She turned to him, her voice cracking. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Jake met her eyes. "Because someone once did the same for me when I didn't deserve it. So now I pay it forward." She didn't respond, just nodded and slipped inside. Jake left a cup of warm tea on the nightstand before he returned to his room. He didn't sleep well. The next morning, she was gone. The bed was made. The tea untouched. On the kitchen counter sat a note on hotel stationery, embossed and expensive. Jake picked it up with calloused fingers. "You didn't ask. You didn't judge. You just helped. I won't forget. E. No number. No last name. Nothing more." He looked out the window. The snow had stopped. The sky was a pale, clean blue, the kind that comes only after a storm. Jake exhaled. The door creaked behind him. Sophie, still in her pajamas, rubbed her eyes. Was someone here? Jake hesitated, then smiled. Just someone who needed a little kindness. Sophie nodded like she understood more than a 10-year-old should. Like you always say, kindness doesn't ask for something back. Jake kissed the top of her head. That's right, sweetheart. But somewhere deep in his gut, he had a feeling. That wasn't just a lost woman, and whatever storm she had run from it wasn't over yet. Not for her, and not for him. The hotel lobby smelled faintly of pine cleaner and overcooked coffee. Jake stood just inside the staff entrance, his uniform still damp from melting snow, the soles of his boots leaving muddy half-prints on the tiled floor. It was barely 8 a.m., and already something felt off. Kendra, front desk manager clipboard queen enforcer of petty rules, was waiting by the break room. Arms crossed, brows drawn tight. "Jake," she said flatly, "you need to come with me. Now." He dropped his tool bag beside the wall and followed her down the narrow corridor that led to the security office. Inside, the head of operations, Greg Lerman, sat behind a desk. Mid-50s graying hair, always in a blazer, one size too tight. He didn't stand, didn't smile. On the monitor in front of him was paused security footage, Jake's truck idling in the snow near the hotel service entrance. The timestamp blinked 2:04 a.m. The passenger door swung open and a figure climbed in. Jake's stomach dropped. "We had a security audit this morning," Greg said without preamble. "As you know, all footage is time-stamped and reviewed weekly. But last night a call came in from a guest claiming a woman left the building through the side entrance in an unauthorized vehicle. We pulled the footage. Jake said nothing. Greg hit play. The woman, soaked barefoot, visibly shaken, entered the passenger seat of Jake's truck. The truck pulled away. That was it. We need to know who she was." Greg said, his voice low and even. "And why you didn't report an incident on hotel property." Jake rubbed his palms together, searching for words. "She wasn't a guest," he said finally. "I don't even think she was staying here. She wasn't dressed for the weather, and she didn't want the police involved. That's not your call to make." Kendra snapped. "You broke protocol." Jake looked from her to Greg. "I didn't take her into the hotel. She was outside, freezing. I helped her get warm and gave her a place to rest." Greg leaned back. "And you didn't think to notify security or management. She could have been a threat. This is post-pandemic hospitality, Jake. There are rules for a reason." Jake felt heat rise behind his collar. She wasn't a threat. She was scared. Greg stood straightening his jacket. "And now we're liable because you made a judgment call that wasn't yours to make. This isn't personal, but we have standards." The words landed like a slap. Greg stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "You're being placed on indefinite suspension while we review. Turn in your badge and keycard." Jake stared at him for a moment, then slowly reached into his pocket. He set the plastic badge and bent keycard on the desk with care. Not slamming, not defiant. Just done. Kendra avoided his eyes. Greg didn't bother to say goodbye. Outside the cold bit deeper than it had earlier. Not the kind that stung skin, but the kind that numbed something inside. He climbed into his truck and sat there for a long moment. The windshield wipers ticked once, twice. He looked over at the passenger seat. Gone. Just melted snow and a faint trace of perfume. That night, Jake reheated leftover chili and tried to smile as Sophie told him about a class project involving paper snowflakes and state capitals. "Miss Talbot says I might be in the spelling bee next month," she added, spoon in hand. "Can you come if I make it?" Jake nodded, throat tight. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." She paused, watching him. "You okay?" He forced a half grin. "Just tired." After she went to bed, Jake sat alone in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, wind howled faintly through the eaves. He stared at the envelope where he kept emergency cash, 173 euros. Rent was due in 10 days. 2 days passed. Then 3. Jake filled out job applications online, most of which ended with automated rejections or no reply at all. His phone stayed stubbornly silent except for a few missed calls from an unknown number he refused to answer. His pride wouldn't let him ask for help, not from his brother, not from the church he hadn't set foot in since Mandy's funeral, not from anyone. On day 4, while walking Sophie to the bus stop, a neighbor paused him. "Hey, Callahan said Marcus from 4B. Saw what happened at the hotel. Sorry, man." Jake stiffened. "How did you town small? People talk." He expected judgment, pity, but instead Marcus nodded and held out a folded sheet of paper. "A buddy of mine's looking for someone to help him clean out a foreclosed property on 12th. It's not much, but it's something." Jake took the paper, the stiffness in his chest easing slightly. "Thanks." Marcus shrugged. "You helped me when my radiator blew. People remember stuff like that." That afternoon, Jake drove to the property, a boarded-up duplex that smelled of mold and mildew. He spent 6 hours hauling broken furniture, scrubbing grime off the walls, and fixing a clogged toilet. The cash payment, $80 in crumpled bills, felt heavier in his hand than it should have. It wasn't glory, it wasn't dignity, but it was something. Later that night, he sat on the fire escape outside his apartment with a mug of black coffee, knees, aching hands scraped. He looked up at the sky where the clouds had finally cleared, stars piercing through like quiet promises. He didn't regret what he did. Not for a second. But he was tired of being the man who did the right thing, and got punished for it. Still, when he closed his eyes, he saw her face, that flicker of panic turning into fragile trust, and he heard her voice. "You just helped." Somewhere in the vast machinery of the universe, he hoped that mattered. And maybe it still would. The morning sun poured weak light through the kitchen blinds as Jake Callahan stood at the sink scrubbing last night's dishes like they'd personally offended him. The hot water helped ease the ache in his knuckles, still sore from hauling debris out of that foreclosed duplex. His reflection in the window looked older than 42, lined, tired. The kind of face that carried quiet weight instead of loud ambition. Behind him, Sophie was humming at the table, carefully gluing construction paper to a shoebox for a school project. Her hair was tied in a lopsided ponytail, a peanut butter smear across one cheek. "You need a hand, Peanut?" he asked. She looked up, grinning. "I've got it. It's going to be a time capsule. Miss Talbot said we should put in things we'd want someone in the future to know about our life." Jake leaned back against the counter, folding his arms. "That. So what are you putting in?" She listed them off proudly. A picture of Mom, one of my spelling bee ribbons, my lucky marble, and a note to future people. "What's it say?" Sophie beamed. "It says, 'Even if the world is hard, it's better when someone is kind.'" Jake swallowed. "Hard. That's a pretty good lesson," he said softly. She shrugged like it was obvious. "You taught me that." By noon, Jake had finished patching a neighbor's bathroom sink for $20 and half a tuna sandwich. He stuffed the cash into an envelope in his glove box, counting the growing but still thin stack. Rent loomed. Utilities weren't far behind. But there was a deeper hunger clawing inside him, not for money, but purpose. Respect. The feeling of walking into a place and being trusted, not pitied. Since losing his wife 3 years ago, he'd rebuilt their life one bolt, 1 hour at a time. Getting fired, especially for doing something decent, felt like someone yanking the floor out from under everything. As he pulled into the parking lot of a hardware store to check for posted job ads, he saw a familiar figure pushing a cart of mulch toward a red pickup. Frank. The older man looked up, squinting. Jake Callahan. I'll be damned. Frank Delgado had been a maintenance supervisor at another hotel chain across town. They'd crossed paths often over the years, sharing tools, stories, and the quiet camaraderie of men who fixed what others broke. "You working here now?" Jake asked. Only on weekends, Frank chuckled, still at the Meridian full-time. Jake hesitated. "Not anymore." Frank's smile faded. "Heard something happened." "You okay?" Jake gave a tight nod. "Trying." Frank paused, then pulled a folded flyer from his back pocket. "You might want to look at this. My niece's company is hiring tech support at the downtown branch. Not fixing pipes, but it's honest work and they train you on site. Jake took the paper slowly. Thanks, Frank. Frank clapped his shoulder. You helped me when my water heater exploded and I didn't have a dime. This world works best when good people keep helping each other. That night, Jake tucked Sophie into bed and lingered by the door watching her sleep. He wondered what kind of world she'd grow up in. If being kind would ever stop costing so much. If someday she'd see her father not as the man who struggled, but the man who refused to compromise who he was. He stepped onto the fire escape again, nursing a cup of weak coffee. Snow was melting in patches. The night air was crisp, but the wind had gentled. Something scraped against the metal below. Jake looked down. A mailman in a beanie was placing a thick envelope in their mailbox. Unusual. It was nearly 9 p.m. He jogged down the stairs, calling out a thanks as the mailman walked off. The envelope was heavy cream-colored with no return address. His name and apartment number were printed in neat block letters. Jake frowned, tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality paper and a photo. The image was black and white, grainy but clear. It showed him mid-action, leaning out of his truck to drape his coat over the shoulders of the mystery woman from that snowy night. Captured by the hotel's exterior camera. Beneath the image, a note typed in bold, centered font: "Integrity doesn't go unnoticed." Renner Corp., Human Resources Division. You are invited to a private interview. Details enclosed. Jake blinked. Read it again. The sheet included a time Friday 10 a.m. and an address, a high-rise building downtown. Dress code business casual. No other explanation, no contact number. Just the invitation and that hauntingly poignant photo. He stared at it long after the wind had died, the stars blinking down like knowing eyes. Renner Corp. He knew the name. Everyone in Marlow did. One of the fastest-growing tech firms on the East Coast. Prestigious. Untouchable. Why him? How did they even get the footage? He glanced back at the photo. There was something almost sacred about it, like a snapshot of a man not trying to be noble, just decent. Jake looked up at the stars again, heart thudding. Some part of him had always believed doing the right thing mattered even if no one ever saw it. But maybe, just maybe, someone had. Jake stood outside the Renner Corp building, gripping the invitation envelope like it might vanish if he loosened his fingers. The high-rise gleamed in the morning sun, glass steel precision, the kind of place that belonged to people who wore tailored suits, not men with grease-stained hands and steel-toe boots. He tugged at his collar. The borrowed shirt was one size too tight, and the blazer loaned from his neighbor Marcus had a faint smell of mothballs. But it was the best he had. Sophie had polished his boots herself that morning, declaring solemnly, "First impressions are sacred, Dad." Jake had smiled, kissed the top of her head, and promised he'd give it his best shot even if he had no idea what he was walking into. Inside, the lobby hummed with quiet luxury. Marble floors, walls of glass, and not a single surface out of place. A woman at the front desk greeted him without looking up. Name, Jake Callahan. I have an interview. She glanced at the screen, then stood. You're expected. Elevators to your left. Floor 31. Conference room C. Jake stepped into the elevator, heart thudding. As it climbed, he stared at his reflection in the brushed metal walls. He didn't belong here. But someone had decided he did. The door to conference room C was ajar. He stepped inside. It wasn't what he expected. No panel of executives. No HR manager with a clipboard. Just one person. Sitting at the head of the long table, flipping through a folder, was the woman from that night. The woman he'd pulled from the snow. Except now she wasn't shivering or scared. She was composed. Crisp white blouse navy suit. Her hair was smooth and tucked behind one ear. And her expression, calm, focused, yet softer than he remembered. She looked up and stood. Mr. Callahan. Jake blinked. You. A flicker of a smile. Yes, me. Please sit. He lowered himself into the chair across from her, unsure if he was still breathing properly. She extended her hand. Emily Renner. Of course. Renner. Renner Corp. Jake shook her hand, calloused palm against polished skin. So, you're the reason I'm here. I am. Silence stretched between them. She broke it first. I owe you an apology. Jake furrowed his brow. For what? For disappearing. For not explaining. For not warning you about what might happen after that night. He shook his head. You don't owe me anything. I didn't help you to get anything in return. I know, she said quietly. That's why it mattered. She folded her hands on the table. I was running away from a very public engagement party where I was expected to smile, agree to a merger I didn't believe in, and marry someone I didn't trust. That night, I couldn't breathe, so I left. Stupid, reckless, but necessary. You didn't ask questions. You didn't try to fix me. You just offered warmth, safety. That night changed me. Jake didn't know what to say. Her voice was steady, but underneath he heard the echoes of exhaustion. I wanted to thank you, she continued, but not with a note. I wanted to do something that mattered. So he gestured around. This is a job interview, pause. Yes, she said, but it's also a test of my own judgment. I have the authority to hire for a new facilities manager position. My team is expanding. It's not charity. I've seen your record. You're overqualified, frankly. I watched footage from the hotel. Not just that night, but how you treated guests, your coworkers, even the janitor who spilled bleach on your boots once. You don't just work hard, you respect people. That's rare. Jake stared at her. You watched all that. She gave a small laugh. I had a lot of time after stepping down temporarily. I needed something real to remind me what leadership looks like. He leaned back. And you think that's me? I know it is. He hesitated. I lost my job because I helped you. I know, and I'm sorry. Jake shook his head. I'd do it again. That's not the point. I've never been in a room like this before. Or offered something like this. It doesn't feel real. Emily stood and walked to the window. The skyline stretched out like a challenge. She turned back to him. It's real. You won't be a token or a poster boy. You'll be on my team. I need people I can trust. People who still believe integrity matters even when no one's watching. Jake stood slowly, the moment thick between them. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a purpose. He exhaled, feeling the tension in his chest loosen just a little. I have a daughter, he said. Sophie. She's 10. She asked me this morning if kindness still mattered in the real world. I wasn't sure what to tell her. Emily smiled softly. Now you can tell her it does. 30 minutes later, Jake stepped out of the building into the sunlight, the offer letter in his hand. It wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. He looked up at the high-rise again, then down at the crisp paper, and finally at the street where taxis buzzed by and people hurried past, eyes glued to phones. No one knew what had just happened. No one had seen the moment that had shifted the weight of his world. But he knew. He pulled out his phone, dialed, and waited. Hey, Peanut, he said when Sophie picked up. Guess what? Her voice lit up. You got it. Jake laughed, eyes shining. Yeah, sweetheart. I got it. We're going to be okay. He didn't hear the passing cars anymore, or the noise, just the sound of his daughter's giggle like a bell ringing through the fog. And for the first time in a long time, Jake Callahan stood tall not as a man who'd lost everything, but as a man who'd never lost who he was. Jake Callahan stepped into Renner Corp's headquarters for the second time that week, only this time he wasn't walking in with hesitation. He was walking in with hope. He wore the same blazer, pressed with extra care. Sophie had insisted on tucking a small folded note into his pocket that morning, a simple message written in purple marker, be kind, like always. They'll see it too. He'd smiled and promised to keep it close. The elevator ride to the 31st floor felt shorter this time. When the doors opened, a tall man in a navy polo with a company badge waited just outside. "You must be Jake Callahan," he said, offering a hand. "I'm Rachel's assistant, Ben. She asked me to show you around and get you settled," Rachel Jake asked. "Rachel, Lynn, Director of Facilities. You'll be reporting to her directly. Emily may have brought you in, but Rachel's the one running the day-to-day." Jake nodded, falling in step as they walked past rows of glass offices and minimalist decor. It was all sleek and bright, a far cry from the dim mechanical rooms he'd worked in most of his life. Ben glanced sideways. "Just a heads up, Rachel's sharp. She doesn't say much until she trusts you." Jake smiled. "Sounds fair." They reached a spacious office filled with architectural blueprints, a corkboard of building schematics, and a sleek desk with not a single paper out of place. Behind it stood a woman in her mid-40s with short-cropped hair and a no-nonsense posture. Rachel Lynn. She turned and offered her hand. "Mr. Callahan, I've reviewed your file. Impressive hands-on experience. You were Army Corps of Engineers stationed overseas for a few years." "Yes," Jake replied, shaking her hand firmly. Rachel motioned to a chair. "This won't be a ceremonial role. You'll oversee all internal maintenance staff, handle emergency protocols, vendor contracts, and manage technical inspections. It's a lot of moving parts." "I can handle moving parts," Jake said evenly. "It's the politics I'm rusty on." Rachel cracked a faint smile. "Good. I'll handle the politics. You handle the machines." She handed him a folder. "Your first assignment, review the HVAC maintenance reports. We've had complaints of temperature imbalances on multiple floors. Find the source." Jake opened the folder. The files were neat, time-stamped digital logs printed for old-school convenience. "I'll get started now." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You don't want to settle in first?" Jake shook his head. "I'd rather earn the chair before I sit in it." Ben, standing by the door, let out a quiet whistle. 2 hours later, Jake was crawling through a mechanical access tunnel above the 28th floor. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and sweat traced the edges of his collar. But the lines in his forehead had softened not from effort, but from familiarity. This part at least made sense. He found the problem, faulty sensors in one of the balancing dampers, the kind of issue that got buried in reports but drove people quietly crazy in their offices. A fixable thing in an unfixable world. When he climbed down the ladder, wiping his hands on a rag, Rachel was waiting. "You didn't have to do it yourself." Jake shrugged. "I like seeing things up close. Reports don't breathe heat." Rachel paused, then nodded. "You're not what I expected. I get that a lot." That afternoon, as Jake returned to his temporary desk, a modest station tucked beside the break room, he found a small, hand-delivered envelope waiting. The handwriting was familiar. "Jake, thank you for stepping into this new chapter. I know this world can be cold, but if we keep showing up for each other, maybe it won't stay that way." No signature, just the letter E. Jake folded the note carefully and slid it into the same pocket where Sophie's message still rested. 2 notes, 2 reasons to keep showing up. But not everyone was smiling. Across the hall in the softly lit corner office, Bryce Hawthorne stood by the window watching Jake through the glass. Tall, polished, and perpetually holding a phone to his ear, Bryce was everything Jake wasn't born into wealth, educated in boardrooms, groomed for command. He ended his call and turned to his assistant. "Who approved, Callahan?" "Emily brought him in directly," the assistant replied. "But he's reporting to Rachel." Bryce's jaw tightened. "And what's his title?" "Facilities manager. Effective today." Bryce said nothing for a long moment. Then, almost to himself, "Interesting choice. Let's see how long he lasts." Jake, unaware of the scrutiny, was in the break room rinsing out a coffee mug when a man in a button-down shirt and khakis approached him. "You're the new guy," the man said. Jake nodded. "Jake Callahan. Leo Myers. Security. We're the ones who pulled the footage that got you canned." Jake let out a soft chuckle. "You always greet people with that kind of honesty." Leo shrugged. "I figure it's better than pretending we don't know. Word gets around." Jake raised an eyebrow. And what does the word say? Leo smiled. That maybe this place needed someone like you? Jake studied him for a second, then extended a hand. Let's hope they still feel that way in a month. Leo grinned. They will. Just don't let the suits rattle you. Later that night, Jake walked through the front door of his apartment with sore shoulders and a full heart. Sophie ran to him, notebook in hand. I wrote a new entry for my time capsule. Jake dropped his bag and knelt beside her. Let's hear it. She cleared her throat dramatically. Today, Dad started a new job. It's a big building with glass walls and secret elevators. But he's not just fixing pipes. He's fixing people's hearts, too, even if they don't know it yet. Jake looked at her for a long, silent second. You're going to make one heck of a writer someday, Peanut. She leaned in and whispered, That's because I've got a good story to follow. 3 weeks passed. Jake Callahan's hands were no longer uncertain on the doorknobs of Renner Corp. He walked the marble halls like he belonged not with arrogance, but with earned quiet. His name was now on the staff directory. His ID badge no longer read Guest. The security team nodded when he passed, and Rachel Lynn, notoriously hard to impress, had offered him her first unprompted compliment just 2 days ago. You find problems before they start. That's leadership. Jake had gone home that night with an easy grin, flipping pancakes for Sophie while she danced in the kitchen to a classic Motown playlist. It felt like life was mending brick by brick. But even as the rhythm smoothed, tension simmered beneath the surface, mostly in the form of Bryce Hawthorne. Jake had seen him twice, once at a shareholder mixer he wasn't meant to attend, and once in the elevator where Bryce had offered a cool, dismissive nod. The kind of look you give a man you're waiting to outlast. Jake wasn't intimidated, but he wasn't naive either. Late Friday afternoon, Jake was in the boiler room with Leo Myers checking the sensor system for floor-wide pressure variance. Leo leaned on the railing, sipping a protein shake. So, rumor is you're making friends upstairs. Jake chuckled. I didn't know I was playing politics. You're not. That's why people like you, but it's also why guys like Hawthorne don't. Jake paused mid-adjustment. He say something. Let's just say there's chatter about questionable hires and overreaching executives. Some folks don't like that Emily brought in someone from outside the pedigree. Jake tightened the valve. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them that decency still matters. Leo grinned. I like you, Callahan. You don't flinch. Jake gave him a look. I flinch. Just not where they can see it. That evening, Jake received an email from Emily's office, brief as always. Jake, would you be willing to stop by my floor at 6:15? Don't worry, it's not a reprimand. Jake stared at the screen for a beat before replying simply, At 6:15 sharp, he stepped into Emily Renner's corner office. It was the first time he'd seen her since the day of the interview. She stood by the wide window, silhouetted by the gold-pink hues of a setting sun. Her blazer was off sleeves, rolled-up hair slightly undone, like she'd been thinking too hard to worry about appearances. Come in, she said, gesturing to a pair of chairs by the fireplace. He sat. She handed him a glass of water, then sat opposite, crossing one leg over the other. Thank you for coming. Jake nodded. Everything all right? She smiled, small but sincere. I've been watching. Quietly. You've made quite an impression, Mr. Callahan. Rachel speaks highly of you. HR says complaints have dropped significantly. Even the janitorial staff says you fixed the vending machine with a spoon and a rubber band. Jake chuckled. Necessity is the mother of invention. Emily leaned forward slightly. I want to offer you something. Jake blinked. I thought I already had the job. This is more than a job. She opened a folder on the table and slid it across. Inside was a formal letterhead proposal. Assistant Director of Facilities. A full-time salary, comprehensive benefits, housing stipend, company vehicle. Jake stared at the paper. This is real. She nodded. It's yours if you want it. He looked up at her, emotions stirring like a tide held back too long. Why? He asked softly. Emily's voice was even. Because you don't ask for it. And because people like you are why this company should exist. We've spent too long building everything on image and projections. You bring reality, reliability, humanity. Jake looked back down at the offer. I don't know what to say. Say yes, she said simply. Outside the building, 20 minutes later, Jake sat in his truck staring at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like silent witnesses. He pulled out Sophie's folded note from his jacket pocket, now creased and faded from wear. Be kind, like always. They'll see it, too. They had. He smiled, then dialed home. Hey, Peanut, he said when Sophie answered. I think we're going to be all right. Did something happen? Jake let out a quiet laugh, voice thick. Yeah. Someone believed in your old man. But somewhere else, someone was not celebrating. Inside a closed-door boardroom, Bryce Hawthorne slammed the lid of his laptop. She just handed it to him, he muttered. No oversight, no board vote. Just handed it to him like he belonged here. His assistant didn't speak. Bryce walked to the wall and poured himself a drink. I built this company with her father. I sat at that table for 15 years. And now she gives a janitor a seat 3 floors down from mine. He downed the scotch in one gulp. I want everything we have on Jake Callahan. Employment history, disciplinary records, family finances, whatever you can find. But sir, do it, Bryce said, because if she thinks kindness is a qualification, I'll show her what kindness gets you in the real world. Emily Renner had always known Bryce Hawthorne was dangerous, but not in the way most people thought. It wasn't his power, or his money, or even the sharpness with which he moved through a boardroom carving through opposition like a scalpel. No, what made Bryce dangerous was that he knew how to smile while setting things on fire, how to say, "Trust me," while cutting the ground from under your feet. He had once been her father's protégé. The son her father never had. And for a time, he had been set to be her husband. Emily had grown up surrounded by expectations how to sit, how to speak, how to steer a company, and never blink. The arranged engagement had come during her 3rd year as VP, wrapped in the language of strategic alignment, consolidated control, and unified leadership. Her father hadn't called it love, he'd called it stability. And for a long while, Emily had tried to believe it might work. Bryce was charming when he wanted to be. Smart, polished. The kind of man who could make a room laugh and forget what they were negotiating. But she had seen the cracks, the controlling emails, the way he dismissed people who didn't serve his agenda, the time he berated a junior analyst in front of the whole floor for a typo in a slide deck and called it toughening her up. It wasn't a partnership, it was possession. And Emily Renner had never wanted to belong to anyone. So she ran. That night in the snow, barefoot and breathless, she hadn't just been escaping the ballroom, she'd been escaping a future written in ink, not her own. She hadn't planned to be found. Certainly not by someone like Jake Callahan. Now, 3 weeks after giving Jake his promotion, Emily sat in her office staring at the new reports on her desk. There had been murmurs. A contractor suddenly refusing to renew their contract. An IT audit inexplicably delayed. A subtle but undeniable shift in how certain executives greeted her in the hallway, cordial but cooler. And then came the anonymous memo slipped into HR's inbox, alleging that Jake had been dismissed from his previous position for misconduct. No name on it. No source cited. Just a carefully worded concern. Emily's jaw tightened as she reread it. She knew the tactic create smoke, then claim fire. Discredit not through fact, but suspicion. She reached for her phone. "Rachel," she said when the facilities director answered, "I need you in my office." Across the building, Jake had just finished walking a new junior tech through emergency generator protocols. The young man, Terrence, was enthusiastic, eager, and soaked up instruction like a sponge. "You sure you're not a teacher?" Terrence asked as they returned to the service elevator. Jake smiled. "My daughter says I lecture like one, but I think that's just her way of saying I talk too much." Terrence laughed. But the lightness faded when Jake saw Rachel standing outside his office door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Something wrong?" he asked. She nodded toward the office. "Emily wants to see you." Now. Emily was standing when Jake entered. She motioned for him to close the door behind him. He did. "I need to ask you something," she said, no preamble. "And I need you to be absolutely honest." Jake's gut twisted. "Okay. We received an anonymous report that you were let go from your last job due to misconduct." Jake blinked. "What? It didn't come through official channels?" "It was slipped in quietly." "Which is what makes me think it's not about truth, it's about sabotage." Jake's jaw tightened. "I was suspended because I helped someone off property who needed help. That someone was you." Emily looked down, guilt flashing across her features. "I know," she said softly. "And I believe you. But others don't know the full story." "And now someone's trying to weaponize it," Bryce Jake said. Emily didn't answer, which was answer enough. Jake paced the office once, then stopped. "You want me to step back?" "No," she said immediately. "But I need to know if there's anything else I should be prepared for. Anything someone like Bryce could twist." Jake shook his head. "I've never taken a bribe. Never mistreated a coworker. I have late rent payments and a decade-old truck. That's it." Emily nodded. "Then we hold the line." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something unspoken, but heavy with meaning. Trust. Fragility. A shared understanding that they were no longer just fighting for jobs or reputations, but for something deeper. Later that night, Jake sat on the rooftop of his apartment building, the city lights twinkling far below. Sophie was asleep. The world was quiet. He thought about what it meant to be targeted not for a mistake but for being in someone else's way. About how fast a whisper could become a stain. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Emily's number. For a moment, he hovered. Then he typed, "You stood by me today. Thank you." Seconds later, a reply. "You stood by me first." He stared at the screen, the corners of his mouth lifting. Some things he thought were worth holding the line for. It happened on a Tuesday. Jake Callahan arrived early as always, coffee in hand, blueprints tucked under one arm. The office was quiet at that hour, just the hum of machines waking up and the rhythmic tap of early risers on keyboards. It was his favorite part of the day. Before the noise. Before the layers of formality were strapped on like armor. He stopped by the server room on the 16th floor to check a complaint about rising temperatures. Nothing dramatic, just a maintenance request that had pinged his inbox the night before. The technician's report said the sensors were fine, but Jake, as usual, wanted to see it for himself. He knelt down by the panel. A faint humming echoed through the metal walls. He opened the wiring hatch and blinked. Something wasn't right. 2 wires had been deliberately crossed. Not an accident. The kind of mischief someone either did to cause a problem or to frame one. Jake frowned, took a picture with his phone, and got to work rerouting. Within 20 minutes, the system was running smoothly again. He filed his own report, careful to document every step. He had no idea it wouldn't matter. By noon, the email hit every department. Facilities. Failure causes. Critical server cooling breach investigation underway. Jake stared at the subject line, blinking in disbelief. He opened the message. Due to a recent mechanical error in our climate control system, a breach in the server room resulted in system slowdowns and compromised data performance. The source of the breach is currently being reviewed. Staff involved may be subject to disciplinary action pending final audit findings. His chest went tight. Then Rachel called, "Jake, my office, now." She didn't look angry. She looked tired, disappointed, and maybe somewhere under all that worried. "They think it was me," Jake said before she even spoke. Rachel didn't deny it. "Bryce escalated the issue before I even saw the report. He's already spoken with legal. He's recommending immediate suspension." Jake sat down hard. "You know, I didn't do this. I do. But the wiring configuration, It matches your access code from earlier this morning. The audit team sees that and assumes sabotage or negligence." Jake pulled out his phone and held it up. "I documented the error. I filed a full report. I even photographed the crossed wires." Rachel took the phone, scrolled, nodded. "I'll forward this to Emily. She won't let this stand." "I hope you're right," Rachel said quietly, "because you've got a target on your back." Jake left the building not as a respected assistant director, but as a man under review. He didn't go home right away. He drove to a park near the edge of the city, parked by a faded baseball field, and sat under the same tree where he'd once taken Sophie for picnics. Everything he'd rebuilt after Mandy died, after losing his job, after nearly losing hope, felt like it was unraveling all over again. Only this time, someone had made it unravel. He ran a hand down his face and tried to breathe through the rising fury. He wasn't a man given to rage, but this was injustice, carefully packaged. He thought of Bryce smug in a suit sipping something expensive behind a polished desk. He thought of Sophie waiting for her father to keep a promise that kindness could still win. He thought of Emily and whether she'd stand up now that it might cost her more than just opinions. That evening, Emily sat at the head of the boardroom table, her back, straight eyes, sharp. Bryce paced the carpet like a cat sizing up a cornered bird. "I've spoken with legal," he said, voice smooth. "We can't afford to look weak on this. The contractor we lost last week is already on social media questioning our safety standards. Callahan is a good story gone wrong. We end it quietly." Emily leaned back, folding her hands. "You seem very invested in this outcome, Bryce." He smiled. "I'm invested in protecting this company." Emily stood. "Then you should know Jake filed a maintenance report and photo evidence before the breach alert even triggered. He fixed a problem someone else created." Bryce's smile faltered just for a beat. Emily stepped around the table, facing the entire board. "We've spent years talking about integrity, innovation, responsibility, and then we're given a man who lives those values, and the first sign of friction we fold." Someone on the board cleared his throat. "Emily, we need to be cautious." "Optics." She turned to him. "Optics matter, but truth matters more. Jake Callahan didn't cause that failure. He caught it, repaired it, reported it, and Bryce knew that before he pushed for disciplinary action." All eyes turned. Bryce's jaw clenched. "That's a dangerous accusation." "No," Emily said. "What you did was dangerous, and I won't be complicit." She slid a folder across the table. "Jake's documentation, his timestamps, his full maintenance report. I'm reinstating him. Effective immediately." Bryce laughed brittle. "You're going to risk your leadership over a janitor in a blazer." Emily met his gaze. Steady. Calm. "No, Bryce. I'm going to protect my leadership by reminding everyone what it's supposed to look like." Jake got the call later that night. It was Rachel. "You're cleared. Full reinstatement. No suspension." Emily called the board's bluff. Jake sat down slowly on the edge of his bed. "Thank you." "You earned it," Rachel said. Then after a pause, and "Jake, she didn't just fight for you. She believed in you. That's not something Emily Renner does lightly." Jake looked out the window, the city lights glimmering like distant fires in the dark. "She believed in me because someone needed to," he said quietly. And in that moment he realized this wasn't just about keeping his job. It was about defending the kind of man he refused to stop being. Emily Renner stared at the reflection of herself in the floor-to-ceiling window of her private office arms, folded, spine rigid. The city spread out below her like a puzzle she'd spent years assembling piece by calculated piece. And yet, for all her careful building, one man had shaken it to its foundation. Not Jake. Bryce. Again. He had done what he always did, hid behind procedures, wielded influence like a scalpel, and expected silence to follow. But this time, the silence was hers to break. The fallout from the sabotage scandal hadn't gone quietly. Though Jake had been cleared, whispers still clung to the edges of the building like fog that refused to lift. Several board members had sent concerned but polite emails about Emily's emotional investment in a facilities manager. One even suggested she take a temporary leave until the matter settled. It was coded language. What they meant was step aside, let the men clean this up. Her father would have told her to do it. Her grandfather would have ordered it. But Emily... She straightened her shoulders, opened her laptop, and began writing a speech. The following Monday, Renner Corp's quarterly town hall filled the company auditorium to the brim. Employees from every department filed in: HR, IT, marketing, janitors, developers, security. Jake slipped in quietly and took a seat in the third row beside Leo. He didn't want attention. He only wanted to know what was coming. Rachel sat 2 seats over, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the stage. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the lights dimmed and Emily walked on stage. She wore no microphone, no prepared slides, just a navy dress, a steady gaze, and a voice that didn't need volume to command silence. She stood alone behind the podium. "I wasn't going to speak today," she began, "but something's changed, and it deserves light." The room quieted further. Even the clink of coffee mugs faded. 3 weeks ago, a man in this building, one of our own, was accused of a critical error. An internal investigation cleared him, but not before damage was done. Not to our servers. To something more valuable. She paused. To trust. Jake lowered his gaze, heart pounding. This man, Jake Callahan, was brought here by me. Not because of his resume, but because of his character. Because in the middle of a storm when I had nothing to offer him, not a name, not a reason, he helped me. Without condition, without pride, without expectation. There were murmurs. A few turned to look at Jake. Emily continued. When I gave him a position at this company, I expected competence. He gave us excellence. I expected quiet work. He gave us morale. And when someone tried to discredit him with a manufactured crisis, I realized something critical. Renner Corp is at a crossroads. She stepped around the podium, no longer hiding behind it. We can continue measuring success by the polish of our resumes and the weight of our portfolios. Or we can start measuring it by how we treat people when no one's watching. The auditorium was silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. I'm not just here to defend Jake Callahan. I'm here to say this kindness is not a liability. Integrity is not a weakness. And I will no longer stand by while fear and politics try to bury the truth. Her voice cracked just slightly, then steadied. My father built this company. I've tried to run it his way. But his way included alliances that suffocate rather than strengthen, including one with a man named Bryce Hawthorne. A shift swept through the room like wind catching dry leaves. I was supposed to marry that man. For strategy, for stability, for show. But I walked away because no company, no legacy, no empire is worth trading your voice for silence. Her eyes swept across the crowd. So, let me be clear, I'm stepping out of my father's shadow. Effective immediately, Bryce Hawthorne's consulting contract is terminated. And any future leadership at Renner Corp will be built not just on innovation, but on decency. The applause didn't start slow, it erupted like a dam breaking. Jake sat motionless for a moment, overwhelmed. Then Rachel leaned over and whispered, "You better get used to being the reason people still believe in good men." Upstairs, Bryce watched the live stream from his office, jaw-tight glass in hand. He didn't finish his drink. That night, Emily found Jake alone in the top-level conference room rolling up HVAC inspection blueprints. She didn't knock, just leaned against the doorframe. You didn't have to say all that he said without looking up. I know. You could have handled it privately. Kept your seat on the board easier. I know. He turned. Then why? She crossed the room, her voice softer now. Because if I ask people to stand up for what's right, I have to be willing to do it first. Especially when it costs something. Jake looked at her for a long time. Then, "You okay?" Emily hesitated, then smiled faintly. For the first time in a long while. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Back at home, Sophie opened her time capsule and added one more note scribbled in purple marker. Today, I learned grown-ups get scared too, but the brave ones speak anyway. Jake Callahan was repairing a squeaky cabinet hinge when the knock came at his door. It was after 8 p.m., late enough that his first instinct was to assume someone needed help, or worse, that something had gone wrong again. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and opened the door and froze. Emily Renner stood there, hair pulled into a loose knot, no makeup, no heels, no tailored suit. Just jeans, a soft cream sweater, and a tentative smile. "Hi," she said, holding up a small brown bag like a peace offering. "I brought dinner." Jake blinked. "You're here, at my door." She gave a quiet laugh. "I wasn't sure you'd open. I wasn't sure you knew where I lived." "I asked HR." Nicely. He stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small, modest, but warm, and lived in. A worn couch with a patch on one arm, Sophie's school artwork tacked proudly to the kitchen wall, a bookshelf cluttered with mystery novels and army memorabilia. Emily looked around as she stepped inside, taking it all in with an unreadable expression. "It's cozy," she said. Jake raised an eyebrow. That's a polite way of saying, tiny but not terrifying. She grinned. "No, it's good, real. It smells like garlic and home." He chuckled. "That's the spaghetti from 2 hours ago." "You missed it. I brought backup," she said, lifting the bag. "Indian food. Hope you're a fan." Jake took it from her. "I didn't realize CEOs did surprise dinner drop-ins. Technically, I'm still the CEO," she said. "Just maybe less of the surprise part next time." They ate at the kitchen table, laughing more than either expected. The conversation drifted work childhood stories, the worst bosses they'd ever had. Jake won with a tale about a sergeant who made them mop a desert tent floor. Then, over a shared dessert of mango lassi and cheap cookies, Emily looked around again. Her gaze landed on the small framed photo beside the refrigerator, a woman with soft eyes, curly hair, and a smile that reached all the way through the frame. "Your wife?" she asked gently. Jake followed her gaze and nodded. "Mandy. She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer." Emily's face softened. "I'm sorry. She was sunshine and music and sarcasm. And smarter than me by a mile," Jake said, voice quiet but steady. "She made everything easier to believe in." There was a pause, not awkward but reverent. "I can see that," Emily said. "The way you talk about her." Jake looked down. "Some days I feel like I failed her, like I'm just patching holes she would have filled without effort." Emily reached across the table, her hand brushing his briefly. "You didn't fail her, Jake. You honored her, in the way you raised Sophie, in the way you treated me when you had every reason not to." The silence between them grew tender, stretched across the table like a thread. Jake finally said, "I wasn't trying to impress anyone that night. I just saw someone who looked like they needed to be safe. So I gave you what I had." I know she whispered. That's what changed everything. Later, Emily stood by the window looking out over the streetlights of his quiet neighborhood. "It's strange," she said, arms folded. "I spend most of my days in glass towers and conference rooms, but I've never felt more grounded than I do here." Jake leaned in the doorway. "That's because towers are built to keep people out. Places like this," he gestured around, "they're made to let people in." She turned to face him. "I used to think being strong meant being untouchable. But lately—" She looked down, then back up. "I think strength might be letting someone matter, even if it's messy." Jake took a slow step forward. "Is that what this is?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I do know I didn't come here tonight to thank a coworker or a friend." "Then why did you come?" She held his gaze. "Because after everything, the scandal, the fight, the fallout, I wanted to know what it felt like to just be near someone good." Jake didn't answer with words. He took her hand, and neither let go Later that night, long after Emily had left, Jake stood outside Sophie's room watching her sleep. Her breathing was soft even. One hand clutched her favorite plush owl. On the nightstand sat her time capsule box, the lid slightly ajar. He reached in and found the latest note written in purple marker. "I think my dad is a hero, but the quiet kind. The kind that makes people safe without needing to be loud." Jake sat on the edge of her bed, heartful eyes damp. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was surviving. He felt like he was living again. A month had passed since the night Emily showed up at Jake's door with takeout and truths too fragile to say over email. In that time, the world didn't explode and the sky didn't fall. But something shifted in ways only those living it could feel. Like spring showing up not with fanfare but in the quiet certainty that the frost had finally loosened its grip. Renner Corp had changed, too. The company newsletter now included a column titled Good News at ground level Jake's idea, celebrating unseen acts of everyday decency. The maintenance team got new uniforms with their names stitched properly across the chest. For the first time in years, the facility's crew felt like a part of the future, not a relic of the past. And in the executive offices, Emily walked differently now. Not heavier, not harder, but clearer. She no longer asked permission to lead the way she believed in. On a breezy Sunday afternoon, Jake and Sophie pulled into a tree-lined street just north of the city. Quieter, greener, the kind of place where kids still sold lemonade and neighbors knew each other's dogs. "Is this the place?" Sophie asked, bouncing in her seat. Jake smiled. "Yep." It was an open house, a modest craftsman with creaky floorboards, a crooked porch swing, and ivy curling over the fence like it was trying to remember a song. Emily stood on the porch, hands in her jacket pockets, watching them approach with a nervous smile. "You're sure about this?" she asked as Jake walked up. "Are you?" he countered. She looked at him for a long moment, then at Sophie, who was already racing up the front steps, inspecting the porch like a detective. "I used to think permanence was the same thing as safety," Emily said quietly. "But maybe. It's not the walls that matter. It's the people who'd never let them fall." Jake looked around the yard. There were dandelions in the lawn, a cracked walkway, a birdhouse hanging lopsided from a tree. He loved it. "I can fix the cracks," he said. Emily turned to him, smile growing. "I know you can." That evening, they sat together on the empty living room floor, no furniture yet, just pizza boxes and laughter echoing off bare walls. Sophie was curled up in the corner with a coloring book and a flashlight narrating stories about an owl who ran for president. Emily rested her head lightly on Jake's shoulder. "This still feels a little unreal," she said softly. Jake reached for her hand. "Real doesn't have to be perfect." She looked at him. "Neither do we." He kissed her gently. Nothing grand, nothing rushed. Just two people meeting in the middle of something they never expected but now couldn't imagine losing. Weeks later, Jake was back on the rooftop of Renner Corp, his favorite quiet spot during lunch breaks. The city spread out beneath him, bustling and unaware of the tiny miracle unfolding in the life of one man who used to think miracles were for other people. Emily joined him, 2 coffees in hand. "Guess what the board just approved?" she said, handing him one. "Your resignation so you can become a full-time travel blogger." She laughed. "No, the Community Integration Project." Jake raised an eyebrow. "We're launching a program that hires veterans and returning citizens for paid apprenticeships in building maintenance electrical work, HVAC. Everything your team does." Jake blinked. "You're serious?" "Completely. And you're running it." He stared at her, stunned. "Jake, I want what you taught me to live past just you and me. This isn't just about fixing buildings. It's about rebuilding people. The way you did with me, with Sophie, with yourself." Jake looked down at the coffee cup in his hand, then back up at the woman he once handed a coat to without knowing her name. "You really don't do things halfway, do you?" Emily smiled. "Not anymore." On the night they signed the papers for the new house, a storm rolled in, nothing violent, just rain against the windows and thunder like a low lullaby. Sophie, now officially in her new room, taped one last message to the inside lid of her time capsule box before sliding it under the bed. Kindness is the quiet kind of magic. It doesn't ask to be seen, but it always shows up when it matters most. And downstairs, with the lights low and the world softened by rain, Jake sat beside Emily on the old couch they'd brought from his apartment, the one with the stitched-up armrest and a history of watching hope return. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. Sometimes the most extraordinary endings aren't loud or dramatic. Sometimes they're just two people sitting close, holding hands, finally warm after a long storm. If this story touched your heart, it's because you believe in the quiet strength of kindness, too. The kind that holds steady, shows up, and changes the world not all at once, but one life at a time. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how kindness connects us across the world. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply reminded you to believe in quiet goodness, please consider subscribing for more heartfelt stories like this one. And from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for watching. Your time means everything to us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and stay connected.